We will go ahead and get started with 30 minutes to better change management using ITIL and Agile. I am the Senior Program Manager for our BMC practice at RightStar, incorporating a number of different technologies that we implement for better IT service management with our customers. Look forward to having this discussion with you all this afternoon. I do hope that you will ask questions if you have them as we're going through the presentation. There is a box to click on Q&A, and myself and Valerie, who is on the line with us, will try to get to as many questions as we can. But certainly do step in and ask questions if you have them as we're going through this. Hopefully you all are all safe and warm wherever you might be. We're here where I am in Northern Virginia. We've got about a few inches of snow on the ground, but glad to be speaking with you this afternoon. So a little bit about Brightstar and about myself in particular. We do have partnerships with several large technology organizations and seek to continue to improve ourselves in the area of IT service management. We are primarily an IT service management practice and deploy a number of tools to help our customers with the technology part of the people, process, and technology triangle that we seek to implement for better IT service management. For myself, I have been a long-time ITIL certified consultant. I received my ITIL expert designation, and then in more recent years I have become a Scrum Master, so trying to blend and keep up to date with the changes in the service management field and also continue to improve my skills in the way that I can help my customers. Today we're focused on change management, and just to go by a strict ITIL definition of change management, we want to enable changes that will benefit our organizations while at the same time minimizing any downtime, minimizing the disruption to the company. Now, I think that's an important point to make because of all of the processes within the ITIL framework, I think that change management is often seen as being the most cumbersome. And people may think that the whole focus of change management is only to optimize or mitigate those risks, but in reality, we are focused on actually allowing changes that are going to be beneficial to the business. And I think that the interesting thing for me is, as I was preparing for this afternoon's discussion, I went back and looked at a presentation that I had done about 18 months ago. And even since then, although there have not been any official changes in either the ITIL framework or in the Agile Manifesto, there have been continual changes in the industry. There are additional frameworks out there. There's a lot of new research going on. So if you've read anything in modern service management, that's something that Microsoft has come out with. There's also concepts such as adaptive change management to get beyond where we are or where we started with the more highly controlled change management that's prescribed in the ITIL framework. There really have been some changes and some interesting growth in the industry. So just to give you some kind of a framework or kind of an understanding of the overall ITIL framework. Here are the 26 ITIL v3 processes. You can see change management nestled here right in the middle. And there are guidelines and recommendations for hopefully all of the processes throughout the service life cycle. So from the initial development of the strategy, designing of the specific service, transitioning into from the design to the live or operational environment, through to service operations, And then finally, encompassing all of that, this concept of continual service improvement. And I will talk a little bit about continual service improvement, or CSI, a little bit later. But just wanted to give you some context for the breadth of the ITIL framework. Continual service improvement, as I mentioned, does circle or encompass all of that, and it focuses here on introducing improvements to the service that we're providing to the organization on a continual basis. So I think that the reason why I'm starting with this, although this is not specific to change management, it does show a parallel to the Agile methodology or Agile methodologies. So within both the ITIL framework and also in Agile, there's a real big focus on improvement and even more specifically using the Deming cycle as a template. So this is the basis of the CSI model within ITIL, and it's also the basis of a lot of the iterative processes or iterative development that we have within Agile. The Deming cycle is often referred to as the PDCA cycle, so plan, do, check, act. So you develop plans or designs, you implement them, you run reports to see how you're doing, and then based on those reports, you take corrective action as needed, and then the cycle continues. Here's the CSI model on which is based on that PDCA cycle. So what is the vision? Where are we now? Where do we want to be? How do we get there? Did we get there? And how do we keep the momentum going? If you look at, on the Agile side, at and specifically on the Scrum methodology, it's very similar, and we'll take a look at that here in a few moments. So just keep that in mind. Some of you may be familiar with ITIL. It was developed over 30 years now, over 30 years ago, and it has spread in the U.S. probably more so over the last 2 decades. Agile, on the other hand, was developed a little bit more recently and is, whereas the ITIL framework is a library that's based on 5 very significant size books, the Agile Manifesto is on this slide in its entirety, and you can check that out at agilemanifesto.org. The one thing that struck me here and that I find interesting is that, of course, this is focused on software development primarily. So we're looking at working software is more useful and welcome than just presenting documents. Also, within the Agile Manifesto, we are focused on responding to change. So again, a very clear parallel then, or tie-in to the change management process that we talk about in the ITIL framework. So the interesting thing here is that if you replace the word software with process, I think this applies equally well. So it's kind of like taking our own medicine in a way, in that we are applying these concepts for agility and for iterative process and for continual service improvement to the development of the processes themselves. So using Agile to implement ITIL can be very helpful for an organization, especially in today's rapidly changing environment. You need to be responsive on a not just yearly, but on a weekly, if not daily basis to your customers. And it's helpful to put some structure in place to help you to cope with that rapid change and make sure that your systems remain resilient. In addition to the manifesto, there are some guiding principles for Agile. So there's 12 Agile principles. Again, replacing the word software with process works equally as well and helps us to see how we can use these Agile principles to also apply to our development of better ITIL processes and specifically on better change management. So we want to be sure that we are measuring, again, even just like within the continual service improvement cycle, we are focused here on measuring our progress. So that's kind of the check in the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. But here we really do focus a lot more on simplicity and less on control. There's more trust, or more of a trust-based environment that's assumed as part of the Agile principles. Within Agile, there are a number of methods or methodologies. You may be familiar with some or all of these. I will touch on two of them, Kanban and Scrum. Those are the ones that I have the most experience with, but these are all just different ways of applying Agile methodology. And again, it's primarily focused on software development, but it can be applied to a number of different things. So, for example, the projects on which I work are not necessarily software development, it's more software implementation, but we do and can take the same type of iterative approach. So if we look, for example, at using Scrum, there is time up front for discovery. We want to be sure we understand the system architecture, the design. We want to be sure that our project team has the appropriate training required. And then we get into a series of what we call sprints. Sprints are typically 2 weeks in duration, but again, there's no hard and fast rule there. It's just we want to be sure that it is a time-bound period. So we're working with a list of requirements, and we, as a team, determine how many of those requirements can be completed within a 2-week time frame. So for example, I know in working with some of our projects, if we are implementing a service desk solution for an organization, whether it be Remedy, Remedyforce, or Jira Service Desk, in that 2 weeks, we usually know with pretty good reliability that we can implement, say, incident, self-service, and service request management, or at least incident management and the self-service interface. We go through the initial planning for that phase, we do the configurations, and then, most importantly, at the end of that time, we make sure to review and have a retrospective. So we take a look at what has been developed. We don't necessarily focus a lot of time on documentation. So as you said, the working software is more important than any documents that we can provide. You have it right there. We can trust that it is a reliable platform, and you'll be able to reference it very easily. At the end of the 2 weeks, then you have a retrospective, which helps then in getting ready for the next sprint or the next phase. So in the next phase, you may tackle problem and change management, and then finally configuration management, the CMDB, and some integrations. So there's, depending on the size of the project, the size of the organization, that's what helps us to determine how many activities or how many requirements can be implemented within a sprint. That then turns into a release at a specified time frame. So you can have several sprints that lead up to a release, and you can have multiple releases over the course of a project. It helps you to get in some of those early wins and show the value to the organization more quickly. In a similar fashion, we have, this is a Kanban board. On the Kanban board, you have, again, we're focused on the work in progress. We want to start from this list of to-dos, a number of different requirements that then, or what we call user stories, that then move from in progress, and then as they're in progress, they eventually go to code review before then finally being released. So again, once you have a certain number of code reviews in process, you may then go to here. You know, we may decide what the maximum number of work in progress for each level is. When we get to that number, we then have a code review, and we then move from code review to done and implemented. This is actually an example from the Jira software Kanban board. So I would focus, when we're talking about work in progress, I would focus your attention on this second bullet here, automation. I think that more than anything, automation is changing the way we work in change management. So it's becoming more and more that we are simply discovering changes and making sure we have good records of them, as opposed to really controlling and requiring changes to go through a full approval process. So in change management, we rely more on these low-risk, repeatable actions. We have, especially when you think back to that Scrum example, we have a team whom we trust. It's in a controlled environment. There are resilient processes in place so that we can quickly back out if a change does not have the desired effect or desired function. And instead of having to get an approval for every release, or certainly for every sprint, we trust that the development team is doing sufficient testing. And again, automation can play a huge role in ensuring the reliability of the code that's being released into the live environment. So when we look at change management the way that ITIL defines it, there are several different types of changes. We have some concepts such as the change advisory board. We have a schedule of outages. And this is all still important. We still want to be sure that we are documenting things efficiently and effectively. We want to have those backup plans, but there's more of a push towards this second type of change, this standard change. And what I mean by that, a standard change is pre-authorized. There may be some levels of authority, but that authority or approval is pushed further down the chain of command. And I'll show you what I mean by that. I'm going to click past this for a moment and look at the levels of authority and risk. So obviously, as the risk increases, we do want to have higher levels of approval. So if we are replacing an enterprise-wide application, for example, then certainly we would need higher levels of executive approval. So as the risk goes up, we then get decisions and direction from the top down. However, there's more of a focus on providing those local levels of authorization and classifying the work that the development teams are doing as standard changes. So we used to think of standard changes as low-risk things such as a new hire request. So you have somebody new joining the organization. There are a number of different permissions that need to be applied or granted for this particular person within the directory, and they need new hardware and so on. But more and more, as the testing gets better and the automation is better around all of the tools that we're using, we can push more of those changes down to local levels of authorization. So to go back, we still follow the same process. There are still the same phases. So we have initiation, where we submit a request or requirement or user story. There's some level of review, assessment, prioritization. It's just that this approval phase now may become more automated and pushed down to lower levels of authority. You're really trusting the development team, the people who are actually closest to the change being made, to know and understand the risks involved and to make sure that they are making good decisions about that you're trusting that they'll be making good decisions about what's released into the live environment. So as we look at this rapidly changing environment, what is still very critical and important is this concept of having good communication. So just because we trust the developers doesn't mean what they are doing should be happening in a vacuum. There should be communication about new services or new features that are being released. There should be, in whatever format we can capture it. The one form of communication that I've added here since the last time I spoke about this is the CMDB. And the reason I added that is because again, with automation, we are having a lot of information come at us from the CMDB, especially if we have discovery tools. So with automated discovery, we can then keep track of and see the changes that are happening within the environment, and have a record of them, so that if something were to happen, if an incident were to occur, if somebody calls and has questions, there may not have been a more formal approval process for that, but we will have at least a reference point for the change that was made. And again, with automatic logging and other types of automation, we should be able to easily see when the change was made, who made the change, and what impact it had on the organization. So as we get close to the end of our time here this afternoon, I did want to leave at least a few minutes for some questions. This is my closing argument. It's not Agile versus ITIL. Both of the methodologies have a foundation on this concept of plan, do, check, act, continual improvement to the customer's environment or to your organization's environment. I would argue that Agile is ideal for the adoption of ITIL, IT Service Management, because it can help us to see past just the recommendations of the framework, but understand it from a perspective of wanting to be more flexible and needing to really be very responsive to the needs of the organization. Again, I can't emphasize enough this whole concept of automation. As we move more services into the cloud, as we lose control perhaps of some of the hardware that for which we used to be responsible, it'll be increasingly important to have good discovery tools and good testing tools in place in order to ensure the stability of our environment, or at least the resilience of our environment. So making sure that if a failure does happen, that we can recover quickly. In addition to improving the overall development life cycle, Agile can also help to simplify the processes themselves. And again, in helping to simplify change management, we are freeing change management of this bad reputation for being too cumbersome and too difficult, and really lending a lot more value to the organization. So that was all I had to say for this afternoon. I'm going to check on and see if we have any questions and answers. So there was a question here. We don't have a development team, but I'm trying to read this here. Our server team fails often to submit requests for change before updating and applying patches. How can we be sure that they are providing us updates in advance? So I would say again, for something like server patching or even larger changes to servers or backend devices, historically those types of changes could have catastrophic results for the organization, and I think that has been a problem especially for service desks at the front end, that you come in on a Tuesday morning and realize that everybody's Microsoft Exchange server is down, and you're getting flooded with calls on the service desk. So that has been kind of one of the more typical problems. I think you're not seeing that as much anymore. There's not really any tolerance for that type of downtime with the virtual systems. Even before considering the cloud, even just with virtualization, we usually have the ability to recover much more quickly nowadays than has been the case in the past. But I think, again, it goes back to automation. If there is a change made to the server, there should be impact or event management systems that capture those types of changes and alerts, not just to the server teams, but there should be alerts that are going to the service desk as well to provide them advance notice of any outages and to equip them better in dealing with requests that might be coming in from the end users. So again, I think that kind of goes back to the whole concept of improved communication and automated communication, because of course the server guys are, when they're scrambling to try to restore service, they're probably not thinking, oh, well, we better call the service desk. Those types of communications are best left to automated systems. Any other questions? I don't see any other questions here at this time. But if you do have any questions, other comments or concerns that you'd like to share, I do have our contact information here on the screen, so you can always reach us at rightstar.com. Our main number is listed there, 703-242-7200. And you can always reach us at sales@rightstar.com. You can also find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and other social media sites.